Well, hello, and welcome to the National Wet Branch meeting today. My name is Robin Murray. I'm the ambassador for West Yorkshire and North Yorkshire. Although we've been running, during this period, we've been running a joint one with the South Yorkshire and Lincolnshire people as well. So we've gone to a whole Yorkshire group. Today we've got Richard Sims from FA Sims with us, and we're going to ask for the next slide. So obviously CPD is one of the major factors that we've got in our practice life, and personally I find that the IFA has provided me with sufficient over the past year and so, and to meet my requirements for the 40 hours that we've got to do. But to help you if you're not taking much up, then there's the update coming on the 16th, which is 2 days away. We've got take your practice from startup to scale up, again on the 16th. And then we've got the start of the tax series. Now they've been very good. I've enjoyed those over the past 2 or 3 ones that we've done, and they've been very useful. Again, we've got another one on the 23rd, how to future-proof your practice from upcoming legislation, which would be very useful. And 27th, so we've got quite a lot. The tax series, of course, on the 22nd runs for 3 weeks. And then there's other ones, and a lot of these are recorded, and so we can go back into the CPD webinars on the page and rewatch them. Next slide, please. We've also got the local branch meetings. Again, these are all on Zoom and will be for the rest of the year. So make sure anyone from Yorkshire, I look forward to seeing you on the 23rd of September at 2 p.m. Please make sure, email Linda if you want to make sure you're registered for that. And of course, if you really want to go and join one of the others that's not your normal branch meeting, again, we'll probably let you do that by emailing Linda and asking to go on if that's more convenient. Next slide, Linda. And then we've got the first for us, an international conference. It's online on the 25th of November. And that's further 6 CPD hours for the attendance. And again, the link for that is down below. It's on, and just basically go to the website, the IFA website, and we'll be able to get that. Must have still to book for that, Linda, so remind me. Next slide. I recently had an email about membership benefits, and again, they're available for the link through the website, and along with the either weekly email from financial accountant as well as the bi-monthly magazine. It's that time again. Renewals will be being posted out, no doubt, or emailed out early to mid-October probably. And then please also follow the IFA on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. The next national branch meeting is on the 28th of September, so 2 weeks away. So welcome, Richard.
Hi, Robin.
And we've remember Richard coming often to the Leeds branch meeting. We've often sort of asked him to talk about the insolvency and AMLCC, so anti-money laundering, and money laundering seem to take more precedence than insolvency quite often. But we're pinpointing you today to the insolvency side of things. And how could a creditor's voluntary liquidation help your client's business? That's a good question. I'm personally trying to avoid all liquidations if I can and CVs if I can with my clients, and no doubt a number of other practitioners feel the same way. So perhaps you're going to change our minds today, Richard, as to why a creditors voluntary liquidation might help. We've got the Q&A box and we've got the chat box, which we'll try and monitor during it. So if you've got questions for Richard, preferably put them in the Q&A, but hopefully we might see them also in the chat box, and if they come up, Richard, I'll maybe interrupt and get you to answer them straight away, because they're probably something that's come up out of your presentation.
No problem.
Okay, so over to you. I think that's the last slide, isn't it, from my side?
Robin, that is fantastic. Thank you ever so much. I'll move across and share my screen from this slide, which apparently should be very simple. I'm pretty sure it's here. Wait a second. Onto there. So hopefully that does that come up, Robin? Can you now see the?
Yes, that's up.
Fantastic. Good news.
Right, I'll mute myself.
The Q&A as well. There's the Q&A. Chat as well. And chat as well. Fantastic. And we are in business. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're keeping well. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Robin, and Felinda, for putting things together. Thank you, Robin, for the introduction. Very kindly to join us. I know everyone is absolutely flat out at the moment with 1,000 things to do. It seems like a bit of a mad time still, I think, with chasing some unknown goals potentially for many businesses, trying to work out what we do next. Going to talk about demystifying the creditors voluntary liquidation process today, which is basically an insolvency procedure. So I'll talk about that as we go and try and see how it fits in. Very much echo Robin's views there. It's something that's done. It's a last resort thing. I wouldn't recommend you do this because you fancy doing it. It's nothing you do for fun, put it that way. It's something that's done when the company needs this level of support to get itself through a problem. And I'll explain where it could be useful to go through as well, but definitely something to look at as a last resort rather than as people don't do it for fun. I think it's the best way of looking at it. It's very much something you do if you have to. So fantastic. Got a series of slides today. I'm going to work our way through those slides. Hopefully, if we can, get my mouse across to here. Bear with me a second. Work our way through those slides today. And most importantly is I get very lonely here doing my talk to myself. So if you have any questions, anything you want to raise in the chat, please do. I'll do my best to keep an eye on all that coming through as we go. I've got the chat window open there. Q&A would be probably fantastic for any questions you have. You want to put them in there, but very much open to those questions, open to sharing your experiences. But I think, don't forget, please, you can share your experiences with the group. We've got well over 100 people here today, so they'll all benefit from your thoughts as well. If you've had a certain experience that did or didn't work for you, or you have a view on something, please share that. It'd be great to hear that. That's very useful, not just for me, but for everyone involved in the webinar today. So fantastic. Please dive in where you can do. Brilliant. So I've had this conversation recently with a lot of people, is that it's still very uncertain at the moment, isn't it? I don't know if that's just me. I think it's shared with the people. It's difficult to know what's coming up. I was having a conversation with, particularly with a retail focus group, and we were talking about, of course, the run between now to Christmas traditionally is the very busy time for retail. Lots of things going on. Then we have traditionally a bit of a slump come January time. I wonder what we're looking at this year, and I wonder how our buying habits will affect the high street over the next few months. It'll be really interesting to see, because if you're anything like our household, we've got myself, my wife, 2 children here. There's an Amazon van turns up every 3 or 4 hours, it appears, or a BPD van turns up with all sorts of bits and bobs, whether it's shopping or as an Ocado van, wherever it might be, turns up. It seems to be the way. Now, in my very simple view, we have just basically changed in the way we buy things. I don't think it means we're buying more or less in many cases. We're buying stuff in different ways. And what we've kind of done is lifted the high street into online, haven't we? Because we've said, actually, I'm not going to physically travel all the time to buy something. I'm going to have it delivered to me. So that potentially changes the need for the high street to have a physical shop on the high street. They can maybe have a warehouse, etc. And we've all seen this. So it is not so much news, but we can't ignore how important we have been to that process and how important your clients have been to that process. So when you look at your clients who are dealing in the retail sector, just focus on that for a moment, they're having to go through that process now of saying, well, actually, either the last 12, 18 months have been fantastic for me and we have grown. And I think you'll probably find you've got a number of clients who have done really well in the last 18 months because they've adjusted to the changing marketplace. We're intrigued if anyone's got any comments to make on that. Whether have they seen clients who have progressed and developed over that time? I think it's a really, really intriguing time to look at that. And then we'll see businesses that have just not been able to be open. So if you extend the retail, I suppose, into hospitality as well, they've had that difficulty over the last 18 months. And then we've got this kind of rush to Christmas now. And what will be intriguing, again, if you look at sort of city centres, of course, Christmas time used to be a lot of office parties, Christmas parties, get-togethers. Now, if people aren't in town because they're not going to town to work because they're working from home, how will that be? So I'm not saying I have the answers to this, I'm saying it's intriguing to see. And I wonder how, I can only imagine the difficulties for a business sat there now saying, what will I face in the next 3 to 6 months? Particularly this run from now through to Christmas, what will happen, how it's going to look like, how different will it be to what I've always seen, what I expect to see this time of year. Again, you've no doubt had those questions put to you from your clients, you've had those discussions to see how that feels for you, what conversation you're having. And the answer is probably you don't have the answer. This is the difficulty we have at the moment. We still don't have the answers because although there is this kind of progressive return to normality, I was just talking to Linda at the IFA earlier, and they're heading back to the office over the next few weeks. So that's interesting. A few days a week. I think I imagine that's probably typical of a lot of businesses. We've been working over the last 18 months kind of on a rota basis, having as much in the office as not in the office, and I think we'll continue to do so. For ourselves, actually, we're going to end up we're actually moving our offices down to a smaller office over the next month or so, because we are going to have a mix of people in the office, not in the office, so we don't need people in the office all the time. Rahul, you've just raised your hand. I don't know how I can deal with that from this end, but if that's a question, just please pop up in the Q&A. If there's anything more technical, it might go on to Linda. So please just let us know. So yes, you've got this strange uncertainty, and it's a different uncertainty. You may have joined us on a similar talk, maybe a year ago, and there was lots of uncertainty then, but it was a different sort of uncertainty because actually we knew that uncertainty was kind of blanket to a certain extent. The uncertainty now is becoming more sectorial because we know, for example, the construction is busy from what I can work out. People are buying stuff, doing stuff, building stuff. There's definitely difficulties getting hold of some material. I think that sort of thing. So they're facing slightly different challenges to, for example, the retail sector, hospitality. It's a different type of structure from there. So I think there's a lack of consistency from that side. There was also, you may have picked up during the week, so especially to the end of last week, the extension of some of the insolvency protection measures that have been in place over the last sort of 12, 18 months, basically. And what we've seen there is that what we're now seeing is that for commercial landlords, they now can't basically take aggressive action against their tenants basically now until March next year. Now, end of March has been extended to in terms of being able to take winding up petitions against a unpaid rent. You've also got an extension of the restrictions on presenting winding up petitions business generally. It's now been restricted to no less than £10,000 liability, and there must be a consultation period of 21 days taking place beforehand. So the government, I can only read from that, don't perceive the end of these this unusual period we've had as being there just yet. So if they're talking about extending things until the end of March next year, that's still quite a window, isn't it? That's 6 months forward from there. I think in reality, we're probably looking at 12 months or so before we really start to see the full impact of changes coming through from there. There's a note just coming from Paul, so let's just look at Paul's comment here. About a client of Paul's, I think one client manufactured £1 million of hand sanitizers in 2 months. Other online retailers with stock outages, interesting. Can't sell through enough, and Brexit effect in longer lead times. Okay, so basically there's a combination there of difficulty perhaps getting a hold of stock, but actually the market expanding to find those right sort of areas. And I guess the hand sanitizers thing will potentially go forward longer term, Paul. It's an interesting idea. I guess we're all going to be a little bit more careful with our hygiene perhaps going forward. It'll be interesting to see how much carries on for. Time will tell from there, won't it? So we've then got furlough coming up. Ends the next few weeks of an hour, isn't it? It's going to finish. I think most businesses will be aware, first of all, aware of that, I'm sure, and wondering what comes next from that, what they do with the next stage, how they do to help themselves from there. I think the stats were saying there's still quite a considerable number of people on furlough. The last stats that came out have dropped tremendously, but I still imagine we've got businesses sat there. If I look at something like airlines, for example, we look at British Airways, for example, the main airlines. Excuse me, they've got a lot of staff, as I understand it, still on furlough because they just can't get back to capacity. They just can't deliver. There's just not enough passengers to get back to that. So they're kind of running at maybe a sort of a percentage size of what they should be this big. They're normally running it this big because there's just not enough business for them to do. Now, your guess is as good as mine. Will we get back? Will we still travel the way we did? Will air travel still be the thing to do? And again, fascinating to know what we'll see. Fascinating. I'd love to ask, a survey of the UK, whether they think they will get back on a plane. Will business ever go back to where it was? We were just talking about this before the webinar started. Are these changes of Zoom meetings, Teams meetings, will that go for longer? Will these webinars continue? Will we end up with a mix of CPD webinars like this, or will we have some physical webinars? What will people want to do? And in truth, you guys and girls will make that decision, because what you choose to vote for will determine what happens. So all these things are so uncertain. And so we face uncertainty as our business, as your business, and your clients face similar uncertainty. So it's really fascinating to see. And I think that uncertainty to me is more granular, it's more sectorial than it was over this time a year ago. And so you all know whether you specialised in certain clients, whether you have certain sort of sectors you work in specifically, whether you have a whole range of clients in a very general practice style. But you'll know, you'll see these different things going through here now. It's a very different position, whereas maybe 12 months ago you were doing furlough requests, you were helping with bounce back applications and civils applications, all that stuff. And that's a different question. Different questions. I suppose I'm asking you, are you prepared for those questions? Are you having those questions? Can you deal with those questions? Do you feel comfortable with that position? And do you know what you're doing? Interesting question that's like, what will you do? So we're going to shrink our office down because we're not going to have so many people in the office. Personally, I anticipate traveling less than I was before COVID-19. I'm hoping I'll be able to do some. What I'm doing is using that that non-traveling time to aid a mix of work, but also have a bit of time for myself. So I went for a nice run this morning, got absolutely soaked because it was persisting down. So I was absolutely drenched, but not complaining. But the point was, I took an hour or so to go for a run this morning, which otherwise I would have been in the car traveling somewhere. So to me, it's fallen to my benefit. Now, I'm not alone in that situation. We've had lots of conversations, people over the last 18 months who are not traveling to work. We were finding time to go for walks. We're finding time to, seeing the blood pressure come down. I had a really interesting conversation with people, the health benefits they found for not commuting, not just having the stress of traveling. Absolutely fascinating set of conversations. So really, really intriguing to see where they had to do and what will happen from there. Similarly, you're going to have a lot of clients who would have had those back loans and civils. It's interesting that we see a kind of a split in the bounce back loan and civils camps, if I could say that. The civils, because they were perhaps subject to more application and more investigation before they went through, the civils related questions are a different set of questions to the bounce back related questions. We were speaking to a lot of clients, potential clients at the moment who are having bounce back difficulties, who are struggling to make those payments, try and work themselves through. It's more of an issue for those clients who are, Rahul, I'm really sorry, you've raised your hand, but I'm not sure how I can help you from this end, whether you can put something into the Q&A perhaps, or to the chat. We'll do our absolute best to help you. So apologies if I can't pick up your questions. I don't know where that comes up. Can you see the raised hands, Linda? Is there anything we can do with those? There's two raised hands, but I can't know how to deal with them, I'm afraid. So apologies to those who've raised your hands, but if you can put anything in the chat or the Q&A, I'll try and help you from that side if I can do. So sorry about that, folks. So bounce back loans, as I say, seems to be a slightly different package to those who had civils. I think that's because of the nature of the business behind it. We're talking to a lot of businesses who are asking themselves, how will I repay my bounce back loan? And those options are different. Of course, the bounce back loans weren't just there for companies, bounce back loans are there for sole traders as well. So those with sole traders with bounce back loans are facing a different set of options to those facing bounce back loans in companies, difficulties repaying bounce back loans in companies. We've seen, interestingly, quite a mix of approach from different banks to these situations. We've spoken to a few clients who've had some really quite aggressive approaches from their bank in terms of getting the money back, but also in terms of beginning to review the bounce back application process. I don't know whether you've seen much of that yourselves, whether you're seeing people asking questions of that, because it might be it's unclear to know. It's difficult to see how that will fall for. Was this, I suppose, pretty bluntly, how many of your clients would be criticised or are being criticised by the banks for the way they applied the bounce back loan? Interesting question. Is that 1%? Is that 10%? I think it's more of a 1%, but we are seeing a lot coming through. Quite intriguing to come through. Next one, we've got government support. So I just mentioned the bits at the beginning, this £10,000 limit on winding up petitions for a while. That's still in place till the end of March. We spoke before about the winding up petitions, that's there as well. And we also previously talked about the this need to this wrongful trading question. If you remember that was in place at the end of June. So effectively protecting directors from making decisions to continue where they couldn't have been more difficult, but they could have been under more pressure to do so. Fantastic. I'll get into the bit of the body of the talk if I can do. I wanted just to kind of get through that position to understand where we were with that, and to say any questions you have on that side, please fire them forward, and would be intrigued to know how your experiences are. This is the big difference for me as a speaker on the webinar. I can't be sat with you all getting your hands raised and questions in discussion. So please do feel free to fire anything through the chat window if you want to. Thanks very much. Okay. Let me just get the slides back up. Perfect. So in terms of what you're up to, well, we just had the conversation about yourself. You're no doubt still talking to your clients a lot. I'm hoping for some of you that your communication with clients is more than it used to be, and that you're finding yourself that you're communicating more often, maybe in different ways, that you're engaging more with your clients. And I think that's a really, if that's the outcome of this particular scenario I've been through, and that's the case, I'm hoping desperately that's a positive thing for yourself. You see that as a good thing, because there's no doubt I think we can all service clients better, with more communication, more information flow. Really positive thing to do, I think. So really, really good from that side. Okay. So this monitoring clients, well, that's not really so much a physical thing as a conversational thing, isn't it? It's an information thing. It's trying to make through that you understand that, keep things going, keep things chatting. And that's important from that side. I think that it's not this particular webinar, but we've had discussions, I think, in the past about how you communicate with your clients. Note coming through here from Paul on the chat, just saying about more often communication, weekly or more communication. Again, really important from that side, isn't it? Keep that information flowing. See if you can keep that engagement going. And I suppose this is a big question. I know this is a very old-fashioned question almost, but in the olden days, and some of you may remember those as I do, your client, you'd have been battling almost your client with your bank. The bank would have been the place they would have gone in the first place for help, and you would have been second. But now you're very much top of the list. They come to you for every business question they need, and you're there to help them with that. And so I think it's really important that they know that you're available. That's assuming if you want to be available. We have a few people I speak to who say, I don't want my clients to talk to me ever, but I'm sure that's not the case for most of you. So as much as you can get people to talk to you, I think it's a positive thing. And don't forget your skills, your set, again, a different conversation, but you are the hub, aren't you? You're the hub of all sorts of information, whether it's finance, marketing, all sorts of things. You're there for that, aren't you? You're using your hub to keep that running. Really important stuff. And of course, your clients are all different, so let's not forget that. Okay, perfect. So let me come through that. So okay, we go right. So just very quickly on the rest, you're asking me, this is not the main point of the talk today. I just mentioned to him as we come through. Company voluntary arrangement, you've probably heard about the CVA. That's the sort of business equivalent of a voluntary arrangement for an individual. There's an individual voluntary arrangement, an IVA, which is the alternative to the company voluntary arrangement. Okay, the company voluntary arrangement is a restructuring of the debt. It's an element of debt excuse and an element of debt deferral. Those two things effectively allow a company to have some breathing space. And there is a specific CVA draft proposal written for the purposes of dealing with COVID-19 debt. So don't think that's not there, and don't think that's not something to be considered. So not the main purpose of today's talk. Company administration is there for you in a client that's got some some immediate difficulties, need to move quickly. Company administration is a very fast moving tool to do that. And the pre-pack administration is where basically a company goes into administration and the sort of a springboard business arrives very quickly out of that. So this is the pre-pack idea. In other words, there was a preparation for that process taking place. Those three options, CVA, company administration, pre-pack administration, please do not think they're just for big businesses, okay? CVAs can be for quite small businesses, administration for small businesses. Don't think they're just the control under the big businesses. This is very much for businesses of the size of clients you probably have. Our clients are generally owner managed businesses, generally relatively small owner managed businesses, up to anything from £100,000 turnover to £5 to £1 million turnover. So probably very similar to your client base from there. So have that in mind. These are not just the reserve of the big businesses. So just don't forget that they're available. Creditors Voluntary Liquidation, I'm going to talk to a bit more detail now. Okay. Okay. So just keeping on the timer, folks. I'm conscious of keeping on time. Okay, we're doing okay. We're doing okay. So I guess it's important that we just cover this bit of basic stuff here. I'm almost tempted to gloss over this, but I think it's only fair that I do mention it to go through for those of you who are not necessarily completely familiar with this position. But there is this question of, is a company solvent or insolvent? Okay, very important. And they're terms that are not, once you understand them, and they're not easily confused, but it's just making sure you feel comfortable they are. And insolvent in simple terms, this is insolvent in simple terms, is that they cannot pay who they should pay in the time they should pay them, or they have a negative balance sheet. Those two things: can't pay who they should pay on time and have a negative balance sheet. Either of those two, individually, by the way, they don't have to be together, individually, those two would lead to demonstrate that a company is technically insolvent. And I guess practically insolvent as well, because if you can't pay people on time, that means the pressure's building up. That's when you start saying to yourself, well, is it time to consider taking some advice? This draws us back in again to your role here, because this information, these telltale signs, are they much good to the client or to you if you find out about this for the accounting year end for the previous year? Is that really going to be day-to-day useful information for your clients? I've been a bit mean on purpose, guys, because we need to be saying to ourselves, how do we know what's happening with our clients now? Now is important, isn't it? Because discovering a company was insolvent 6 months ago, in most cases, 99% of the cases, is even more insolvent 6 months later. The more you can be involved with that client and see the figures and understand what's going on more quickly, more live, the more you can help, because you can see the issue and deal with them. This is where your, obviously, the cloud accounting systems, your management accounting, your VAT returns, all that stuff, MTD, all about making sure you are close. I've said this from when MTD first came out. MTD for us is a fantastic thing, because actually you should have the need, you should be forced to see current information about your client. The challenge for you, of course, is to help them to understand the benefit of your help, because it's going to cost your help to get them to work more closely there, because these are the sort of things you can help with. Unfortunately, we see a mix of clients who haven't addressed this need to see current information, and we see those who have. And in some cases, those who have, they can't do anything to move quickly to resolve the situation. But I'll come on to ways in which the liquidation process and other options potentially help. But please try and be as close to your clients as you can be with that information, because that's the way you're going to help them to move forward, by having that proximity to their information. Fresh information is very useful. Okay, really good to that side. So the more you can see the information.
Richard.
Robin. Oh, can you hear me, Robin? Oh. I'll carry on. Robin's frozen. Have you lost me, folks? Or is that just Robin I've lost? Okay, well, I'll carry on, folks, for now, just to see what comes up next. Just trying to see what's coming through. I'm getting a feed through on the Yeah, people saying he's still seeing hear me, so I'll carry on. So I'm guessing it might be Robin from his end. I don't know, but I'll carry on for now. If you do have a problem with my signal at all, just let me know. Please do. Okay. So just running through those two technical insolvency tests, making sure that they know there is this this understanding of the pressure point. What we're looking at here is if the company is technically insolvent, what we have to be careful of when the directors do stuff when the company's insolvent going forward, they are very much in the shop window. They're very much under investigation, and that's why I was very careful when they see insolvency, getting some help and advice to make sure they do the right thing from that point forward is not just about being sensible, it's about protecting their position. And don't forget also protecting their personal assets, because of course, if they start doing things incorrectly, they may find themselves in a situation where they could find themselves being criticised subsequently and maybe having to repay funds back to the company. So not trying to worry people here, but just make sure if they're facing those situations, you're aware of that, get them some help as soon as you can do to make sure they're not going to make themselves any worse than they are at the moment. Okay. So CVL, keep an eye on time. We're doing okay. I've got 28 minutes to go according to my notes. The clock here, so we'll do this. We'll do this. That's good, good, good. So what's the creditors voluntary liquidation? Okay, simply put, creditors means who is owed money. Okay, the creditors are the people owed money by a company. Okay. Voluntary, they, as in the directors and the shareholders, choose to put the company into liquidation when they want to. Okay, liquidation, it is technically, it's an end of the road process. It's a closure of the company. What I'm really keen to get you to see and understand here is that there's a difference between the company and the business that lives within it. Okay, look at the company as a shell. In simple terms, a bucket. The company is like a bucket. Okay, simply put, everything that lives in the bucket is the business of the company. Okay, really important. You need to be able to have in your mind and visualize lifting the business out from the company. Look at those two as being two different interchangeable things. Okay, really, really important from that side, because when we start to talk about the CVL in more detail, that'll make more sense. But think about the concept of a pre-pack or administration, where you're going to move the business out to different companies. Just see those as divisible items, and simply put, I suppose. Okay. Now, for the CVL, as I mentioned, it's director shareholder begin the process. It's the most common. I would use the word popular, but that's not quite a word to use in this situation, is it? But it's the most common insolvency process for companies in the UK. It's basically designed to scrumple up that box, that company box we talked about. Okay, you need to work with someone like ourselves as licensed insolvency practitioner, because only then they can be the liquidator for a voluntary liquidation anyway. But don't forget, it's not impossible that the business, the bits inside the box, even parts of those bits, could be lifted out and put into a new company to allow that bit of the business to go forward. So it's not uncommon that we come across a business that basically has historically worked really well, but actually some parts of the business have been underperforming. They've been dragging back the other parts of the business, and we end up having to break it down slightly and divide it up into the good bits and the bad bits. So don't lose sight of this divisibility, as I say, the company, its business. Really important to keep that in mind. Okay. Now, so we talked about starting a new company. That's fine. I won't go through that too much. Talked about buying the good bits out. That's good. I guess the word there, just to have in mind, so, in case you're thinking this is some sort of dodgy scam, this is the law, by the way, buy, notice that word there, allows the directors to buy out the good bits to carry on. Really important, okay? So if I've got a can of Coke here, that can of Coke's in the company, and that can of Coke is worth 25p, we have to realise 25p for it. Okay, that's our responsibility as the liquidator to get value for that. We can't give stuff away for nothing, because when we're liquidated, we're acting on the interest. Though we're requested to act on behalf of the shareholders and directors, our responsibility is to the creditors of the company. Okay, those owed money. Only once the creditors have been paid off in full do we have a duty then on to the shareholders. So be aware, this kind of Coke I'm talking about, we must always get market value for that. We can't give stuff away. We have to get fair value for it. Okay, and that's the challenge we have. Whether it's a physical asset, it could be a big piece of kit. We've sold stuff of significant value that's a huge piece of kit. It could be a desk and a chair. We've got to look at all those assets and say, right, well, how do we do that? Now, you look at me thinking, well, Richard, that's a lot of skills you have there. Well, I don't have all these skills, because what we do is bring in specialists. So we bring in agents to do the valuation, to review the assets. We bring in people to secure assets, to protect assets, to value assets, all those things, insure assets. So we are a bit of a kind of a conduit almost. The liquidator acts to bring certain things together to make them work. And in this situation, let's say we're going back to this first line there, directors can restart as a new company. We are the conduit to get from the old to new. And if you remember our kitchen table business rescue talk we did a while ago, you've got this move from point A to point B, where we are today to where we want to get to. Okay, and point B may look very similar to point A, it may look significantly different. And that's the leap we have to work out. How big is the need to get from a loss-making, non-functional business to a functional, profitable business? And that's the leap. That's where we come into those conversations to work out what's next. In this situation, we talk about one that needs a fairly significant change to get from A to B, and the liquidation is the route we're talking about. It can, of course, be the end of the road. It can, of course, be that there is no way business for the business. In fact, the directors don't want to do it anymore. The business is out of fashion, whatever it might be. But I would say the vast majority of cases we deal with, we're able to find a way forward, and that will give more value back to the creditors of the liquidation in the first place, more value back to the creditors of the company in liquidation. It's really important from that side. Okay. And again, don't forget, we've got line 1 to 4.4. The new company can make an offer to purchase the assets. So yes, the existing directors and shareholders may see more value in those assets than the third party. They may pay more for that, but in the same way, it may be sold to a third party. Sounds a bit sad, but it's not uncommon. It's sold to a competitor. Can be sold as a bolt-on to the businesses. People will see the opportunity to take bits of that and add it to their own portfolios and make it work better. So there's all sorts of opportunities around to do and through. And so it's not uncommon, unfortunately. Again, we have to do some deals about when we get paid. In some cases, we have to get paid over a deferred period of time. Of course, we defer the money in quickly because we can pass it to creditors more quickly. But again, we have to look at these ways of working out how to make it most effective there. Okay. How long does it take? How quickly being in liquidation? The key thing really here, I mentioned then 2 bits there, is when the company gets into liquidation and once we've been appointed. I think the most important thing here is, well, it's twofold of this. The interest of trying to save the business and take the pressure off the business. Of course, getting to liquidation is the key thing there. Getting us involved early, getting that process starting, and when necessary, contacting the pressure creditors. One thing we'll look at is saying when is the point at which the pressure we need to deal with. So if we deal to a client, they say to me, we've got a problem paying a debt in 3 months' time. We've got some time to plan. They ring up and say, I've got a debt I can't pay on Friday. I can't pay the wages on Friday. We have to have different conversations. So again, depends on how quickly we need to move in those situations, how quickly it has to get into liquidation. The point being, it's there to take pressure away in that situation, to look after the creditors where we can do. Okay. Then roles we have to take as liquidator. They can take short or less time depending on the complexity of what we're looking at. But again, it depends again on the complexity of the case. Will depend how quickly we have to move on certain things. Okay. Liquidation is pretty quick to get into now. It doesn't take a long time. I mentioned this pressure issue. We've got to try and help. And it's not just the pressure of creditors chasing for payment. It can be the pressure on the individual directors. They may be feeling they're under distress. It may be feeling like they're feeling more pressure on them because of the things happening. And don't forget, managing a business through financial difficulty is a different skill set. A lot of people are really good at growing businesses, starting businesses, managing businesses, operating businesses, but managing a business through difficult times is a different skill set. And not everyone suits that very well. Not everyone finds that easy. And not everyone very few people take pleasure in that. Not many people, enjoy that piece of work because there's a lot of pressure coming from that. Okay. So the issue here is then we talk about is timing. When is the pressure coming? But also identifying what those issues are. We talk here about symptoms and causes. Okay. The symptom is the company can't pay its VAT next month. The cause is because of a bad debt. The cause is because of a loss of customers. The cause is because of a fire in the premises. Who knows what it might be? The symptom is the cash flow. The cause is what's behind that. So always look at that distinction there again. cause, symptom, cause, symptom. Think about the two between the two. And also think about a cause could happen now. You might be looking at the symptom, as in the lack of ability to pay VAT, in 3 months' time. Look ahead, plan ahead, think those things through. So again, it's down to how much time you have to spend with your clients, how much time you have to spend with any one client, how much they're going to pay you for your help. But your experience in your education, your training is so valuable in these situations. Please don't lose track of this. I know it doesn't suit everyone to want to do this work because of the time you have and your own availability, but actually, the more you can get into the teeth of these situations, the more you can really help, and you'll see huge value from that. And you'll see the client's been very grateful as well. Okay. As I mentioned, liquidation needs to be a licensed practitioner. I mentioned that earlier on. I'm one of those, by the way. I'm a licensed insolvency practitioner. So there's a process to follow. We're appointed liquidator. We go through a number of steps we have to do once we're in office, which is, first of all, realising the assets. Of course, we have to work out what assets there are to realise, how to get best value back for that. Then we have to work through steps like, it could be debt collection, it could be securing assets on a site, it could be protecting assets from theft. You know, if a site's closed down, there's assets in there, that site needs to be secured, it needs to be insured. We need to make sure we take every step we can, because once we're liquidators, we are fully responsible for all the assets of the company. We can't just ignore things and leave doors open and leave things lying around. You know, we have to look at all that to make sure we're doing the right thing. Okay. Again, the complexity of the situation, obviously not just the complexity, but it's also the number of creditors involved. If I distinguish here perhaps between a business where its customers are businesses, so it's businesses sort of B2B style business, to a business that is selling to consumers, B2C style work. Now, if those consumers have paid deposits, for example, for items they're due to purchase from the client heading to liquidation, and they have, for example, for some reason not paid on a credit card or a debit card in many cases, and they're losing that deposit, you can imagine these folk become very motivated. They're very unhappy about the situation, and it can be a huge amount of time spent trying to help people to understand those situations and helping them to understand what recourse they have, and introduce them to an insolvency process, which is completely new to them. So there's a lot of kind of people handling work involved in what we do, and I say handling doesn't perhaps come across right, but it's about how we manage their expectations, how we manage their emotions, how we help them to understand the situation. Okay. In those cases, you know, liquidations can run several years in some cases, but generally you're going to look at getting them out 3 to 6 months, because the more time we spend, of course, the more costs we're spending on the case. And if we can conclude our investigations and discover there is no wrongdoing in the company, that's one of the things we must do. And we don't discover that, then we can bring things to a close and move on. As you're probably aware, what we'll have to do within the liquidation process is make a report to the government, make a report on the conduct of the directors to the government, and they will consider whether they think the director should be subject to some form of investigation or potential disqualification as a director. Okay. Again, it's not easy stats to look at what percentages are disqualified, but again, it's an interesting process. It's developed over the last couple of years. It's now basically an algorithm-based position. We file information to an online system, and they will decide in the first place whether they want to look into any further or not. So they have some criteria within that. We need to complete the forms in now. So the idea was that historically, insolvency practitioners, liquidators used to submit 2 different types of reports. One that was a less favourable report, and one was a favourable report, if that's an easy way of describing it. Those distinctions gone. It's just a simple set of information provided now. So again, it's a straightforward result in that position, and they will review the position from there. So you will see occasional directors being disqualified if they've done the wrong thing, absolutely. But in the majority of cases we're seeing at the moment, most of the clients we're talking to at the minute are have had difficulty because of this COVID-19 situation. And if it's beyond their control, it's not their fault in simple terms. So we just have to have a good look and make sure things haven't been done incorrectly, monies haven't been used incorrectly. But so the majority of cases we're seeing coming through COVID-19, where they've lost that business because of that, then it's not been their fault because of that. So we're trying to basically establish the reason for the failure of the business. Okay. And we talked about, I kind of talked about this pressure on directors a bit earlier on. Keeping an eye on the time as well. So we've got 14 minutes to go. We'll be fine, folks. We'll get it done. Do feel free to find any questions you wanted to go. As you say, I'll just keep chatting otherwise. So I mentioned this kind of chat position. Now, Paul's raised your hand, Paul. Does that mean the chat isn't working, or does that mean that something's not coming up? So I've got Q&A is open, but there's nothing in there. Just checking, and there's nothing on the. Oh, Paul says I'm about to write a question. Okay, Paul, that's fine. That's good. I'll look out for that. Okay, no problem. Fantastic. Perfect. Okay, so come back to yes. So directors taking this different sort of work on. This is a new type of work, working as a director of a difficult company in difficulties, different pressure, different things to deal with. What we find is it can cause significant, it's a horrible thing to say, but can cause significant pressure at home as well. Okay, because if partner and spouse relationship, they don't know what the other partner is going through, the stress they're facing, the stress they're feeling. It's very easy to become feeling very isolated as the director, for example, in a small business. You don't know who to talk to, how to get help, where to turn to. This is where you guys come in awareness, because that's where I think you can be that person. And what you will pick up, and again, this is another different talk we've had before, is you may see a difference in the person. You may see a difference in your client. You may see them not being quite the same, the buoyant, lively person they are, because you can see the pressure, and you can see the strain in their face. It happens to us all. When we get under that stress and pressure, it changes us. And if you see that with a client, please, I encourage you, please step in, have a conversation with them, try and work out how you can help them in this situation. I mean, we're drifting slightly towards the mental health stuff, so I know it's been a big issue over the last 18 months, but we've been talking about this emotional difficulty of businesses in these situations, directors in these situations, many years. It's the same issue, is how do they cope in these positions? How do they get help for this? Okay, so it's all about having conversations with them, and perhaps having your own sort of list of places to turn in those situations. If it's something you think is going beyond business into something that becomes a lot more almost dangerous to the individual, make sure you've got your support package in place, knowing where you're going to turn them to, where to point them towards. That's just going to be a big help for you. You can simply say, have a chat with these people. There's plenty of people to turn to. Make sure you've got that list ready for them, because there will be people in those situations. So sorry, getting a bit deep there, but it's really important not to lose sight of this just being purely looking after the business interests of the individuals as well. Okay. So getting help is really important. I say having your structure together. We mentioned before about having the idea of having some finance people available to you, having some marketing people available to you, having some insolvency rescue people available to you. I say in the same way, having people you can turn to, clients towards for mental health, help, all those sort of things. The more you've got your network of things to turn to, and this is where the IFA will help you as well. They've got a wonderful set of partners and things in place to work through there. So have all those things in hand. The more you have them ready to buttons to press, the easier it'll be for you, because you'll be more familiar with those issues when they come to you. Okay. Have that network ready for them. Really important. That's why I say use the IFA network where you can do. So, right. Sorry, the problem with the buttons there. Back in action. 11 minutes ago, folks, will be fine. There's a question popped here from Howard. Hello, Howard. Thanks for this. It says, if a business has a negative balance sheet due to liabilities due after 12 months, is it still technically insolvent? Well, if the client has got a negative balance sheet and the debt is due over 12 months, it depends what's due to happen over the next 12 months, Howard, because if we're looking at what you've got there, if the document, let's say the directors have a meeting or shareholders have a meeting, they sit down, they recognize that fact, and they say, right, this is what we're going to do to deal with the situation. So what we're saying is this is, if in 12 months' time that debt isn't paid and the company becomes cash flow insolvent, there will be a review back by the liquidator to say, well, what has led to this situation? So the answer is it needs to be explained and detailed by the directors and shareholders at that point now as to why they don't think that's a problem, why they think that will be paid in 12 months' time, what steps are they taking to improve the situation. So yes, the company is technically insolvent, absolutely, because the balance sheet is negative. There's no set timing on that. It's just a question of saying, right, how do I look at that? So the question is, the business has a negative balance sheet due to liabilities due after 12 months. Is it still technically insolvent? And the answer is yes, but it's about then explaining, making some minutes, having some board minutes, having some conversation, doing some cash flows, justifying what's happening, basically. That's the most important thing, because it's going to help to explain the situation. Always have a record of the thought process and make sure that stands up to review by the individuals themselves. If you're advising that client externally, have a look at the minutes and see what you think, and see if it's reasonable. Do you think that will stand up? So yeah, very much very much a great question, and one that we could talk about a lot, but it's just looking at the circumstances that lead to that situation, and will it be, is there any reason why it wouldn't be settled? Okay. Paul's sent a long question over. I'll look at that in a second, Paul, for you when I've got a few minutes to read it through. Notes here from Mary. Hello, Mary. Is a CVA ever considered when negative balance sheet has been created by directors' loan funding the expenditure? So to read that again, is a CVA ever considered where the negative balance sheet has been created by directors' loan funding the expenditure? Okay. Now, you might need to just put me another little point in there for Mary if you can do. When you say loan funding the expenditure, so that's a situation where the director is owed money. I'm just, if you just put a note in there for Mary, so I'm assuming the situation that the director is owed money by the company, that's what's caused a negative balance sheet. Perhaps you just clarify that point for me, and I'll come back to you in a second. Thank you. I'll come back to your question in a second, Paul. So yeah, talking through this, how it affects people individually. Personal guarantees, borrowing, look at that, let's look at the externality of the bucket, the company, look at the flow out of that. If there's personal guarantees in place, be careful of that. Look out for the where directors are acting incorrectly, they could end up with personal liability. Quite a difficult situation's been there. So I mentioned at the very beginning about this protection for wrongful trading that was in place during the COVID-19 situation up to June this year. But be aware that directors could be in trouble if they've not done things correctly, if they've acted incorrectly in that process. So the questions have been asked now are really helpful from that side. Improper conduct, as mentioned there, could lead to directors having to repay funds back to the company. Just come back to Mary's question now. This next one is yes at the startup point. So I'm envisioning the situation, Mary, I hope I get this right, that the company starts and owes money to the director of the company, and it means the company is insolvent because of that negative liability of the company. In other words, the directors put significant funds to the company. In that situation, I wouldn't have thought a CVA is probably the first place to turn for that, Mary, because the CVA would normally need the creditor to approve to that. And the creditor would basically, in this case, the director would approve that restructuring anyway. If, Mary, this director's liability is one of a number of liabilities, then that might be a different conversation. But if you want to put this point up afterwards, Mary, feel free to do so. I'll try and answer it in more detail for you to get a bit more picture for you. But fantastic, look at that, fantastic. Okay, great. Rodney's put a question through, so I'll just put through the next couple of slides and get us a bit closer towards the end, and then we'll be ready for finishing off in a few minutes. So I hopefully might just have to run over a few minutes here, folks, but hopefully you'll be hanging in there for me if that's okay. Let's just pop through these slides for a second, and I'll come back to questions in a minute if that's okay. Back to here. A sec. Okay, I'll whip through this very quickly. The process, it's all on the slides for you guys anyway. So, final managed by an insolvency practitioner. Directors propose liquidation to shareholder. So, directors are the start point. Directors' start point are very important. Company creditors notify the liquidation. Information sent to creditors to explain the background of the position. Shareholders vote. Creditors consider liquidation. In other words, the creditors vote. Company's in liquidation. Okay, so they're sort of, that's the process very quickly because it's nothing you need to know a huge amount about. So I'll just click on from there. Then we advertise that so people know about it. We've been appointed. Company's house know about it. We get the books and records in because we can't investigate, of course, unless we have the books and records. Gather assets in. Some of that will have taken place before liquidation in certain circumstances. Go through the history of the company, put this report in I mentioned, and then we basically go through and review those issues and decide what action could be taken. Okay. Potential pitfall. I'll come back to pitfalls in a second. I'll jump to some of the questions now. I'll come back to pitfalls in a minute. We've got a few minutes still, so it should be okay, folks. So question from Rodney. Paul, I haven't forgotten your question. I'll come back to your question next. Rodney says, is there an issue in having accounting fees paid just prior to company entering liquidation in preference for the creditors? Otherwise, difficult to justify doing a lot of work in a company if likely not to be paid. Thanks, Rodney. So, Rodney, the situation is an interesting one because there's a balance there between a role you might play, Rodney, in assisting the company reviewing its financial position to decide upon whether it is insolvent or not, and whether liquidation is the answer or not. So there is a work there that could be done to assist there from your perspective, and it would be difficult to argue that you shouldn't be paid for that work. Where you have a slightly more difficult situation, let's take a situation where, let's say, you're owed £6,000 for last year's accounts, very reasonable fee, I'd say, £6,000 for last year's accounts, and they ask you to do some help with some cash flow forecast now, which might cost £500, but you want the £6,000 paying before you'll do the £500 work on a cash flow forecast. So you can see that kind of rather difficulty situation you may be facing, and we would also face then as liquidators, look back at that. So I would look at that from a context of relativity in terms of the size of the debt to the amount of work that's required. So look at the historic debt as a different thing to the work you might need to do to help them through liquidation. Okay, so I hope that kind of answers your question to a certain extent. It's an interesting one, but look at it from the liquidators putting their hat on and saying, they're going to look back at that and say, was that a justifiable payment? Okay, was that a reasonable payment? Was a reason for that payment being paid when other people weren't being paid? That's the key question there. Okay, Paul, I'll now jump to your question. Apologies for being a bit slow coming back to that. Let's read that through quick. I'll read it out loud for you folks. I don't know if you can see that. I'm guessing you can see the chat anyway, but I'll read this through to you. Let's come back into there in a second. So, I'll come back to that in a second. Right, so, sorry, press my keyboard. Right, so if your client is badly let down by investors who are not paying the funds promised at the correct time. Okay, not an uncommon situation, Paul, as you're aware. Apart from me helping my client in raising other finance, the client is at risk. In this situation, the client is not at fault, however, may be forced into talking to an insolvency practitioner. Okay. Am I correct in assuming that it is not their fault as directors, and am I right that they need to start talking now? Balance sheet solvent and net asset position, working capital just about to become negative. I think the situation there, Paul, is that we need to keep an eye on the director's position. The director will still have that. They are still they're still driving the boat, so to speak, driving the car. They're still responsible for the company's actions. They may or may not have been promised finance, and they will have to consider whether those promises are realistic or not. We had one client dealt with, they've been promised funding by a third party. That funding was coming and coming. It never came after 6 months of them waiting for it. And they had to be very careful because, of course, how could they justify that? They had to be very careful to make sure they documented the availability of the finance. Was it a real thing? Was it just a fabrication? And all those things there. What you're saying in this note, Paul, you're saying basically the client's been let down, so they know it's not coming in. As long as they'd been reasonable in thinking about when those funds would have come in and what reasonable in thinking those funds were available in the first place, that will help them tremendously in making sure they justify their decisions. And certainly if they jump before the company becomes particularly insolvent, it's going to help them tremendously, because it means they're not going to be seen to have ploughed on blindly, because it's the first rule of holes, isn't it? The first rule of holes is stop digging. If the directors in this situation has seen the problem and just carried on making it worse and worse, that's when the problem comes out for them. Okay, I hope that kind of covers that point off for you as well. Fantastic. Back to managing the potential pitfalls. We are just about there to finish. I have a couple of slides to go, and any more questions, just give us a shout, please. You can do. Hope you just hang on for a few minutes for any folks. That's okay, please. So pitfalls of liquidation. Dividends from an insolvent company. Okay, if dividends are drawn from an insolvent company, be very careful of that. Okay. Also be careful. It gets further complicated now. Thank you, Paul. It gets further complicated now because the bounce back money. And the bounce back money, reading through, I'm just reading, so paraphrasing here, reading through what's been issued in terms of guidance on bounce back loans, it is generally acceptable that if a bounce back loan was used for basically living expenses for a company, for company directors of a company that had no income from COVID due to COVID-19, naturally they were probably earning a small salary because they're mainly enjoying dividends, so there was no furlough money for them, and there was no self-employed benefit for them because, of course, they weren't self-employed. So in that situation, then it is generally seen subject to insanity of use of bounce back loan. If it was replacing income that would otherwise come to the director, that is considered to be an acceptable situation. So it's about taking a reasonable view. There is no set answer to this, of course, but everything is follow the logic of what I just said there. So dividends that were taken out from the company to effectively fund the living expenses of the company when the company directors, when they couldn't have any other income, is a slightly different situation. The COVID-19 situation is slightly different to where it would have been 18 months ago. We could have a whole probably webinar on that particular point, but if you do have any questions, please just give me a shout. That's okay. Payments to connected parties. There's interesting Rodney's questions here, isn't it? Payment to connected parties. Well, in this case, Rodney, you wouldn't have been a connected party because you're not the director or shareholders or any of those things. So it's not quite the same thing, but it raises the point of looking at payments to parties at all. But connected parties, let's say a payment going to a brother, sister, uncle, etc. Ian, thank you. Sorry you can't. My apologies, I've run a bit late there, and thank you for joining us today, and I really appreciate it. Thanks very much. So you've got the connected parties. So payments to a brother, sister, father, mother could be subject to be treated almost being the same as being a payment to the directors themselves. So keep an eye on that. Very careful there. Overdrawn loan account. Overdrawn loan account is effectively a debt to the company in the same way the debt would be. So be conscious of that. Again, we're seeing situations now where some overdrawn accounts have been created by drawings during COVID-19 to allow the directors to live, and a split of some loan accounts that are going back more historically, and they are from years before. So they have to be treated differently, slightly differently by. So again, there's not a straight answer to that one. Something we need to talk about on a case-by-case basis. And wrongful trading we mentioned before. Again, look out for how the business was being, the funds of the company were being used, and where people going on blindly. But you have this extra caveat now with this COVID-19 restriction, which is preventing people from being criticised in quite the same way they used to be. Okay. I'll mouse back on here, sorry. Monthly costs. So if you're looking at a small CDL from 2,500 plus VAT, that generally is about where we're going to be. To be honest with you, the bulk of the small bounce back loan cases are getting like this. They're very tiny. There's no assets in the company. They've taken whatever they can from the company from the bounce back. This business has not recovered, basically. There is no sign of recovery, and the CDL is what people looked at in that situation. So again, we're having to keep our costs as low as possible to make that workable for the company. Okay. Voluntary liquidation is alternative to voluntary liquidation. I mentioned this sort of creditors voluntary liquidation, voluntary being a choice by the directors and shareholders. Compulsory is the key word here. This means that someone's been pushed into liquidation, but I did mention at the beginning about how the winding up petition process is being restricted now on landlords more than £10,000. So we're seeing less compulsory liquidations because the law just hasn't allowed it to happen. So voluntary liquidation is where people will go, and we're not seeing creditors being so aggressive. What we will see at some point is this lock position for HMRC, where they've not been able to be aggressive in recovering debt due to them. At some point, they're going to have to go bang, and they're going to have to start the process of charging against all these companies for non-paid HMRC tax debt. And we're going to see a massive compulsory liquidation petitions coming out, is my expectation, because only so long they can wait. When it's going to be, I'm guessing, judging by the current things I mentioned earlier about the 31st of March being restrictions on certain things, I reckon it could well be into next year before HMRC start taking action. Interesting to see, but watch this space, I think, on that one. Solvent liquidations, very quickly. The solvent liquidation, members on liquidation. This is really, in most cases, where you're going to have a contractor who's now been forced through IR35 into doing taking a full-time role, got cash in the company. MVLs, very cost-effective, not massive amount of money to pay for, very efficient, very quick-moving, and are there available for you to consider with your client in that situation, to look at from that side. So keep an eye on that one. That's a members voluntary liquidation, as I say. MVL is a sort of brief version of that. Okay. Bridging 2.6. That's just about us, FA Sims and Partners. Those you've not met before, thank you for joining us today. Really, really appreciated it, because it's about, we have, the more we can know you guys, we'd love to be standing in front of you. But then again, some of you, we just talked before, some of you might be happy where you are, and you might want to deal with it on just a webinar type basis. So fascinating to see where that will come to from this situation going forward from there. But I say thank you for taking the time to join us then, and thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself to you. As Robin mentioned before, MLCC is our other business, and some of you will be using MLCC at the moment for your AML compliance stuff. So great if you are. If you're not, give us a shout, trying to help you out with that. A few links and stuff there for you. I mentioned the kitchen table business, resting the way through. Just a really easy way to break down a business situation break it down to its constituent parts, rebuild it, and work out how big this leap is from point A, where we are today, to point B, to where we want to get to. Very simple stuff to do. The website's there with a few bits of information placed there for you from that side. Please feel free to have a look through, and any feedback's really helpful for us. And that's the end of the bits and bobs from this side. I think I've got the questions answered best I can do. Thank you ever so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thank you for bearing with us. We've gone slightly over schedule, but it's been useful to have a few questions to go through and pick stuff out. But we're always very happy to have any questions. We have the IFA advice line in place, so just give us a shout, give us a call. Happy to answer the questions for you. And I know this is strange times, as I say, so please give us a shout wherever we can do. And thanks again. I'll hand you back to Robin. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Linda. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. Excellent presentation as usual. And I think most people, from the responses we've seen, most people seem to have liked it and been very useful. So I don't know if there's any more slides, Linda, for me to speak about, or can we end, unless there's any more questions that anybody wants to specifically speak to Richard about? I think we can end the meeting.
Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Have a great day. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you,
Linda. Thank you.